Hello creeps! Andy here, and today I wanted to rank for you all of the books that were published in 2023 that I read either last year or the beginning of January this year. So I don't know, I thought that this might be helpful because there's so many new books that come out every year and it's hard to kind of keep up with all the modern books that are coming out, plus all of the other books that you already have or that you want to read. So I don't know, I thought that this might be helpful. What I did was I separated them into 3 categories. These are my least favorite books of 2023, my moderate books of 2023, and then my favorites of the year. They're mostly horror, there's some thriller in here, and then we have our nonfiction as well, one. So we kind of have a little mixture, but mostly in, you know, the horror thriller genre, where I typically stick. Obviously, I don't like talking about books that I don't like. I know how much work goes into writing, so it does really suck when there's a book that I just don't like or it's not for me. However, I do think that just by talking about it, somebody who might have different views about different genres or subgenres might feel differently and might pick up the book because of that. You know, it's not like I'm not trying to be mean to say that I don't like these books, but there's no point of me having a channel if I'm gonna lie and say I loved every book when I didn't. So let's start with my least favorite books of the year. I have arranged them in how I felt that I would like them, and then I actually went back and double checked in my reading journal how I ranked the books, and I was actually pretty freaking accurate, but I used that to become just a little bit more accurate. So these are my least favorite books of 2023. Let's start out, and by the way, in the categories, they're still my least favorite to my most favorite. So this is still an order. This is still my least favorite book, and this is still my most favorite book. Do you get what I'm saying? But I just broke them into categories, so I thought that that might be a little bit easier to just kind of go through them. So my least favorite books of the year, let's start out with this bad boy. This is The Night House by Joe, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, Nesbo? I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong. Also, this is not originally in English, and so it was translated. So I'm not sure if this is just the English version that came out in 2023 or if the book itself came out in 2023. I'm not sure, but my version says that it was published in 2023. So let's talk about this book. This is about a boy who moves to a town. He's kind of like a bad kid. He convinces his friend to do some bad things, and he witnesses his friend getting sucked into a phone booth. Like sucked into the phone in the phone booth. But obviously the cops don't believe him. And when other kids in the town start disappearing, they start questioning him, and they believe that he had something to do with their disappearance. Now, that sounds cool, right? I was excited to read this. It sounded kind of like a Goosebumps for adults. And actually it's broken down into 3 portions. And the first part did kind of feel like that. This book is wild. And here's the thing, I understand why it was written the way that it was written because of what ends up happening at the end, but it's just not a book that was for me. Let me actually pull up my notes here because this is one that I read this year, so I actually started taking a little bit more detailed notes so I can talk about books a little bit better. I just wrote here, it says, what do you think of the book? It was not for me. I wrote also that I did enjoy that the ending gave the reader a little bit more context on the strange narrative of the book. It was done purposefully to sort of, I can't really give away why because it would give away the book. It also reminded me very much of another book that I also was not a big fan of, but if I tell you that, it'll give away the entire book. So unfortunately I can't. There were a lot of twists and turns in it. I wrote so many turns it gave me whiplash. And yeah, that's kind of how I felt about it. Some of the writing was stilted. I don't know, again, if that was like purposefully done because of the weirdness of the narrative and what ends up happening, or if it was the writer, or if it was the translator, you know, like some books kind of translate a little odd. They kind of feel like you could tell that they're translated books. So I'm not sure what part of it just didn't feel like a clean narrative to me, but there was just something stilted about it. I wrote that it was kind of like American Horror Story. That is not a compliment to me. I'm not a big fan of that show. The season with where they go to the insane asylum, oh, I think it's called Asylum. You know how they're like, there's monsters and vampires and aliens, and you're just like, whoa, bro, relax. You know what I'm talking about? I don't know. A lot of people seem to like that show, so maybe you won't connect with me on this, but that's how I felt with this. Not that there were monsters and aliens and this and that and this shoved in, but there were so many twists and turns where I was just like, relax. You don't have to write every horror trope in one book, you know? So that's kind of how I felt reading this. I said I understood the intention behind it, and all parts do come around to form a picture later on, but it just didn't hold my attention enough for me to love the book. I said I would have preferred the original premise more instead of it broken down into 3 parts. It reads like a YA book, which is another reason why I'm not a big fan. I'm actually not sure if this is supposed to be a YA book because I found it in not the horror section, but the newly released section. But I just wrote that there were parts where you were just like, okay, but what was the point of that? Some weird choices in here, not the book for me, but yeah, it's for somebody. I will say though that I did go back and read reviews of this book, and a lot of people did feel the same way. It does have lower reviews, but a lot of people do love this writer, and they talk specifically about one series that he writes. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I will give him another chance and we'll read a different book of his and see if maybe I enjoy that. I have been surprised recently at reading books from writers that I previously didn't enjoy and then enjoying those books. So I really don't let one book taint an entire writer for me, you know? So the next book here I have is Grady Hendrix's How to Sell a Haunted House. Now, before you gasp audibly, okay, let me explain. This was my first introduction to Grady Hendrix. I have other of his books, and the only one that I've read is this Paperbacks from Hell book, where he just talks about different paperbacks from the 70s and 80s, horror books from the 70s and 80s, and I haven't even finished that book, right? But I've gone through and read sections of it. So I had no idea what his writing was like. Now that I know what it's like, I feel like I will have more idea going into it, and I won't be so like, what am I reading? I was very confused with this book. It's about these kids who end up having to sell their parents' house after they pass away, and it's how to sell a haunted house. You're like, oh, it's ghosts and stuff, but it actually is more about dolls, and dolls do not freak me out. I don't think there's anything creepy about dolls. It just didn't hit for me, you know what I mean? The way another horror book would. However, if you don't like dolls, or if you think dolls are creepy, I think you would like it. Now, let me be very honest with you. This book is well written. It's not that I didn't like his writing style in that sense, like the way it was written. He's a great writer, but I just didn't realize that he has more campy 80s slasher movie feel to his writing. It just threw me off. So that's why this one was not my favorite. However, now that I know what his writing style is, I think I could go into the next book and appreciate, and I mean, I don't know if all of his books are like that, but that's how that one very much so felt for me. So I will at least be prepared if the other books are like that going in, and I don't think it'll throw me off so much. I was also expecting ghosts and a haunted house, and I got dolls, and I was just very thrown off by that. The next book I have here is Just the Nicest Couple by Mary Kubica. This was either an ebook or an audiobook, I can't remember, and it's about two couples. I talked about this in my last video. I'm going to do this again because I felt like this is how I kept it straight. There are two couples. This guy disappears. They know each other, but these people have something that they're hiding, and that's the entire book. Really, there's really not much else that happens in that book, and I've read other Mary Kubica books before, and usually they keep me engaged and entertained, and there's more that happens throughout the story. You get a little bit more of the story as you're going through, but this story really just fell flat for me, and I'm not sure if, like I said, it was because maybe it was an audiobook that I listened to it. I can't remember, but maybe that's why, and it's because I wasn't reading a physical copy. I'm not sure, but that book I felt a little bit disappointed by, especially because I liked other Mary Kubica books more. The next one I have here is Riley Sager's The Only One Left. This one came out this year. This is the first year that I've ever read a Riley Sager book, and I really did fall in love with a few of his novels that he's written prior to this one. Now, this is kind of the same with the Grady Hendrix thing. I love his writing. I really do. I think that he's very talented, and I really do enjoy most of his female characters. And the reason why I like his stories is because I can somehow see myself in some of his female characters. However, with this one, it kind of reads almost like a whodunit. You do get that same sense of everyone's keeping secrets, so you're kind of arm's length from all the characters. And the reason I like his books is because I can relate to the characters, and if everyone's keeping secrets from me, I can't get to know the characters in the way that I typically would. So that is one issue that I had with this book, and very much so, like The Night House, I felt like there were so many twists and turns in this book. Like this one even more so than that one. This one, every other page, it was like, but then this happens, but then that happens, but then this happens. And I was just like, what is happening? However, I did think that this was intentional and interesting because through the story, it's told, I didn't even tell you what it was about. It was about a woman who supposedly murdered her parents when she was younger. She's kind of the, you know, like a Bloody Mary lore of the town, like her own urban legend essentially, even though she's still alive. And she lives on this what do you call this? Like, a house that is falling apart. That's what I'm trying to say. Dilapidated. Okay, she lives in a dilapidated mansion on top of this hill, kind of off on her own. She doesn't go out, and she's older now, in her 70s. So a care worker comes to live with her, and she tells the care worker, I want to tell you everything that happened. She can only type, she can't speak. And so you go on this story of actually learning what happened when she was younger. So I did think it was interesting because with the dilapidated mansion, you kind of get thrown off. It almost mirrors how the reader feels reading the book because you're just on such unsturdy ground reading it. So I did think that there were some really genius takes in this book, but there were so many twists and turns. It felt like I was watching what's that movie? I have talked about this before in relation to this book. Wild Things from the 90s. You know how in that movie, every scene you're like, are you kidding me? Another twist and turn. That's kind of how I felt. Like so many twists and turns, I just couldn't get behind it. But well written nonetheless, so that's why it's a little bit higher up. And the last one I have here is What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. This is about a young girl who gets attacked in the woods when she's younger. Her two friends are there, and I believe they witness it. The man gets arrested, he's put in jail. Now we're 20 some odd years later, and she ends up going back to the town, meeting up with her friends to kind of work through some stuff because the man has passed away in jail. Here's the thing. I liked how this one was written. I did enjoy the story and I did enjoy the writing style, but it was very close to a story that is real, like a real incident that happened to a young girl, and it just kind of made me feel icky reading it. And I don't think that it's inherently, I mean, I talked about this in like my last video, I don't think it's inherently bad to be inspired by true events. I mean, what's more demented than things that have really happened? But I think when a story is that big and you know it so well, you kind of have no choice but to feel icky about it while you're reading it. So that's why it was in that category as opposed to my next category, which is my moderate category. These are books that I did enjoy, but for one reason or another, they were more or less enjoyable than books in this category. And the first one that I have here is A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This one was about a woman who goes to live with her mom for a little while, and her mom starts acting kind of strange and she doesn't really know what's happening. And then the story kind of continues from there. Let me go to my notes really quickly. Here's the thing about this one is these books are more, there are things that I really liked, but then there are things that I disliked about them. And I actually really did enjoy this book. I thought it was pretty cute. The main character, if she were a real person, we would be best friends. She was funny and someone that I could see myself being friends with, which I don't feel that way about a lot of main characters. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I also thought that there was a lot of character development for such a short book. There were some cool aspects in here about vultures and flowers and bugs. She's like an archaeologist, and so there's a lot of cool stuff in here kind of, you know, weaved throughout. But I will say that it turned into more of a fantasy book, which just isn't my genre, and that's just the honest truth. That's honestly the reason why it's so low on this list, because I did enjoy the writing. I thought that the horror elements of it were really cool, and there were some really cool scenes in here too that I liked, and then there were some like fantasy scenes, and fantasy is just not for me. I just don't enjoy fantasy at all. It just doesn't do it for me. Like witches and wizards and flower people and magic roses and just like stuff that isn't for me. So if you do enjoy horror and you like fantasy, I do recommend this one because it was a good read, and I thought that, yeah, I really liked her writing style, and I will check out more of her work. But I do think that a lot of her work does revolve around the fantasy genre. So yeah. The next one that I have here is The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is about a couple of women who get selected based on their work to join a writing retreat led by this world famous writer that they're all obsessed with. And so they go to this retreat, they're supposed to write a book in X amount of time, and then whichever book is the best gets published through her agency or whatever. And so the women end up being selected, going there. They're kind of in the middle of a snowstorm, you know, isolated from everybody so they could just focus on their work. And so you get that claustrophobic, stuck inside feeling with this giant sprawling mansion. There's some interesting stuff in here. I would say the first half of this book was just so interesting. There was some really creepy scenes and some stuff that I really hadn't seen done before, but I would say that I didn't connect with the story fully. There's a lot of questions of like your sexuality and things like that, which I didn't connect with. On the opposite side, the reason why I enjoyed this book was because it was about women in their late 20s, early 30s, still trying to figure out who they are. And it did feel a little bit like a coming of age story, even though the characters were so much older. And I really liked that. You know, being a woman in her 30s, you don't often get characters in their 30s who are still figuring shit out. And it's refreshing. It's refreshing to see. And so, yeah, there were parts of this book that I really absolutely loved. And then parts of this book that maybe weren't for me or that I didn't connect with quite as intensely as I connected with other parts of the book. So that is why this book is here. Although I am very interested to read more of her work, and I will definitely pick up other books of hers that she has written or will write in the future. Next, I have Stephen King's Holly. Holly is a character, Holly Gibney is a character that shows up in a variety of Stephen King books. So this is kind of her, you know, she finally got her solo book in this. Her story starts with the Mercedes books, the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, where she ends up helping a detective. They start their own little private investigative work on their own. And so this is kind of her by herself for the first time trying to solve a murder. There were some aspects, again, of the story that I really liked. She is searching for a woman who's gone missing, and then starts to kind of put together that other people have gone missing around this town and tries to figure out who the killer is. I did enjoy the killer. I really did enjoy their brutality and kind of what they wanted, and the story behind them I thought was pretty interesting. But the thing that I did not like about this book was it takes place in the middle of the pandemic. I'm okay reading about epidemics and pandemics. I just read The Night Parade by Ronald Malfi. Fantastic book. Absolutely adored that book. But this was about our pandemic. And so, like, I just don't want to read about masks and vaccines. That's why Holly is in this category. Otherwise, it may have been, if like it wasn't in the middle of the pandemic, it may have been higher up on the list. Next up, I have Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. Oh, you know what? These had the same ranking. So I don't know which one comes first. Maybe this one. This is The Twisted Dead by Darcy Coates. This is the third in the Gravekeeper series. This is about a young girl who wakes up and can't remember where she is. She just knows she's being chased by a group of men. She ends up running into a town, befriending people who help her out, get her on her feet again. She can talk to dead people, but she doesn't know why or where she came from. This is the third in the series, so you get a little bit more of the story. And I thought it was going to be the last one, so I thought we were going to get more answers. It's not. There's a fourth one coming out this year. I don't know if that will be the last or if the story will continue. I'm not sure. But yeah, I did enjoy this book, but it was just more of the in the middle Darcy Coates books for me. Like, not my favorite Darcy Coates, but not my least favorite. It's just like a fun, easy read about a girl who sees ghosts. And kind of same with Dead of Winter. It's so interesting because a lot of thriller books that I talk crap about, like this has the same feel to it. It's a whodunit. People get stuck in the woods and they get knocked off one by one and they're trying to figure out whodunit. I have to be honest, it was so unbelievably obvious who done it in this book. Like, you know, in the first 20 or so pages. But I think the reason why I did still like this one was because, I mean, it's Darcy Coates. She has such a way of keeping you engaged with her stories. Every single end of the paragraph of every chapter ends with a cliffhanger, and so you're always just excited to turn the page and see what happens next. I also think that it was interesting to read this book because I've read so many of her other books, and so to see where she kind of began as a writer to what this book was, you know, it was exciting to read. It was exciting to see her growth as an author, and I also liked that there were more horror elements in this one than most of her other books. Her books are pretty mild in comparison to other horror books, and so I would say that this is one of the more intense books. Yeah, you get decapitations and stuff, which doesn't always happen in her stories. So yeah, I liked the growth of the author. I just love Darcy Coates, and so that's why this one is here, but still not, you know, my favorite book. She definitely has other books that I enjoyed more. Okay, let's talk about my favorite books of the year. And I think that you will see most of these, not all, but most of these have, I feel like, pretty specific audiences. And so I feel like I enjoy the work that's a little bit more polarizing, not in all cases, but in these specific authors' cases. And so I'm not saying these books will be for everyone, so just, you know, keep that in mind. But the first one I have here is Maeve Fly by CJ Leede. I really enjoyed this, and honestly, I think I enjoyed this because she has a very unique writing style, and it reminds me, not that her writing style is like Bret Easton Ellis's or Chuck Palahniuk's, but that she has a unique writing style that doesn't emulate them, but that is her own like they do. Does that make sense? And so, yeah, she just reminded me of reading a book that I love, you know, a Bret Easton Ellis or a Chuck Palahniuk. Spoiler alert, those are what's coming up next. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed this story. It's about a girl who doesn't quite fit in with everyone. She lives with her grandma in Los Angeles. She really connects to these nihilistic characters in books that don't really fit in with society, and she knows that there's a dark side to her, and she ends up following her Patrick Bateman and just letting it loose, and just debauchery ensues, you know? It was a really fun read. It was unique. I think there was enough below the surface that you can kind of dig and find some meaning of different things there, but it was definitely a unique story. I mean, the cover is absolutely beautiful, and yeah, it was a book that I've really enjoyed this year, the first book that I've ever read of hers. I'm not sure if that was, I think that may actually have been the first book that she's written, and yeah, I mean, come on, you can't get much better than that. I can't ask for much more. It's almost like reading a less intense version of American Psycho, because there definitely are some similarities to American Psycho in there. It's not on the same level as American Psycho, you know what I mean? But it does kind of have that same feel to it. The next one I have here is Not Forever But For Now by Chuck Palahniuk. Now, before I give you my review of this book, I am not saying that you will enjoy this, okay? Let me be very clear. This book has horrible reviews, and honestly, I'm very glad that it was published in 2023. I wanted to read it for this video specifically. Otherwise, I probably would have put it off because it had such bad reviews, and I know that I shouldn't let reviews dictate how I feel, because usually I do like books that are lower in the threes, that range of books. Those books are pretty polarizing, and a lot of the books that I enjoy are in that range of books. This one, I think it might be even lower. Let me find what it's currently at right now. Oh yeah, this is at a 2.81. So definitely not a book for everybody. And let me explain why. Again, I took notes on this guy. So let me just give you a little bit of what this is about. It's about bestiality, vomiting on corpses, brothers copulating, necrophilia, murder, writing serial killers, killing famous people, wet nurses for 30-year-old men. I'm telling you, the level of messed up in this book is just unparalleled. There's a whole lot, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's at the level of extreme horror, although they do have a lot of the same things that they're writing about. You know, it's almost like a parallel to an extreme horror book, but extreme horror focuses on that. This, it's just kind of like, there's a comment in there about a wet nurse for a 30-year-old, and you're like, wait, hold on a minute, did I miss something here? And then, yeah, that is what it says. So, although it is disgusting and vile, I feel like it's less so than maybe an extreme horror book. Now, let's get into this one. This one surprised me, I gotta be honest. I have read a lot of Palahniuk books. I've told you guys before, everything he released, I ate up. I bought immediately. He was like my god in high school. After college, I read a few of his books that just didn't connect with me, and I am interested now how I would feel about them, but it has been a while since I've connected with a Palahniuk book, and this one was awesome. So what is it about? It's about two brothers. I mean, gosh, it's about two brothers. Their maids keep having accidents and dying. They're stuck in this kind of like childhood, adolescent, everyday life, but they're grown men. Then the grandfather is trying to get them to take over the family business. Now, this is what I like about this book, because you're reading this and you're like, what is this about? You know, because there are definitely comments on, for me personally, I think just like nepotism or growing up wealthy or being entitled and things like that. You know, there's definitely things that you can pick apart throughout the book, but the core meaning of what actually is happening was definitely ambiguous to me. Up until the ending, you do get a little excerpt from Chuck Palahniuk who says what his intention was behind the book, and then you get to sit there and go, oh my gosh, and that's why this, and that's why this, and then all of these lines start getting connected, and you're like, fuck, I loved this book, you know? So it's a weird read. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. It will not be for everyone. But here's what I will say. If you like Chuck Palahniuk's writing, if you like his writing style, and you understand that he is a genius, and that, well, to me, and that everything that he writes has meaning, you know, I think if you can understand that going in, then you can kind of peel apart the layers and make your own understanding of the book. And then once he gives you what he actually intended, you can kind of go back and see how cool this book really is. Oh, it says, what did you take away from this book? And I said that experiencing someone else's pain can be a bizarre roller coaster of fuckery. I think it's brave to bear your pain like he does in this book. Oh, I also wrote that it's not a linear narrative. It's very circular, kind of like how he wrote Fight Club. I did write some of my favorite lines. Let's see if I should read a few to you. I'm just gonna give you these out of context lines and you're gonna be like, what the fuck? Okay, but the last I'd looked, the ravenous tutor had taken them apart and was trying to eat their hearts and brain. I liked this line, a trick of fake fakes faking their fakery. Otto's too clever to put a stop to our cook. Her poached pears are reason enough not to cut her throat. Come on, that is such a great line. There's so many in here. All birthdays do is grow a person old. It's having too many birthdays that kills people, it is. Come on, this book is so great. The meaning behind it, I loved, I connected with. People complained about the repetitious language, but I think that it's there for an intention. It's there to kind of show this life, this day that's your life that's lived just like over and over again in the same vicious cycle. It really did bring me back to kind of reading my first Chuck Palahniuk book, where I was reading it and I was just like, fuck, this is something that I've never experienced before. And it really does hold a lot of meaning that I think a lot of people can probably connect with in some way or another. People also complained in the ratings about how debaucherous it is, which that's fine, you know, that's fair. If you don't want to read a book that's about brothers copulating, I totally get it. But I think, like I said, I mean, he even says here in the back of the book, I'm not going to tell you his intention because I don't know if that would ruin the read for you, but he says having a go are all metaphors, duh. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot here. I think that it's an interesting book to read, and it's up to you if you want to kind of do the work. Kind of the same for this guy here, Bret Easton Ellis's The Shards. This was my next favorite book of the year. And a lot of Bret Easton Ellis's work is, like I said before, you know, controversial. Kind of you either love him or hate him, and either way, you know, it's fine. It's up to your own opinions and interpretations of the text. But let me explain why I loved this book so much. So it starts in high school with Bret Easton Ellis. I believe it's in the 80s, but I could be wrong. He is the main character in the story. You have a serial killer, and then you also have this cultish kind of group that's doing weird things as well. Then you have Bret Easton Ellis and his friends. He's exploring his sexuality, befriending the popular kids in school, and just kind of trying to live his life. They get potentially mixed up with either the serial killer or the cults or none of them. But the reason why I loved this book so much is because Bret Easton Ellis, the character in this book, is maybe the most unreliable narrator I've ever fucking experienced. And the cool thing about him is that as you go through, he starts taking more drugs, he starts lying to everyone, he starts becoming even more, like you see his spiral into becoming even more of an unreliable narrator. And all you have is his ideas and opinions to lead you on this journey, you know? So as you're going through the story, whereas most stories, you're getting closer and closer to the narrator, you know? This one, you're kind of pulling more and more back from him because you're like, what the fuck is going on? And by the end of the story, you're just like, this is so fucked up. It's so weird. It's honestly one of the most unique books that I've read in a very long time, and I really did enjoy this process. Again, not one I would recommend to everyone, but if you're a fan of Bret Easton Ellis and you have read before, not that it's necessarily a requirement, but I think that reading Less Than Zero and American Psycho kind of set you up for this book. He even references writing them in this story. But I would say that, I mean, I've said this every time I've talked about this book, but it's very nihilistic the way that Less Than Zero is, and there's a lot of similarities I can say between the two books. And then it is fucked up like American Psycho, but not as much as American Psycho is. I'm curious to see what this actually has on Goodreads. Oh, this has a 4.0. Okay, so people liked this more than American Psycho, which is actually very interesting to me. Okay, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you don't need to enjoy his work to like this. I was just trying to think of it from an outside perspective. I don't know, maybe this is one that other people would enjoy. I would just say that it is going to be a strange roller coaster, especially if you haven't read any of his books before. I would personally recommend reading Less Than Zero and American Psycho before, only because I feel like that gave me a lot more context on the book, and you get to know his writing style and kind of his just nihilistic perspective through those stories. But I could be completely wrong and people could have just really enjoyed this book. Yeah, wow, that really did surprise me. So yeah, loved this book. Bret Easton Ellis is just one of my favorite writers, so I really enjoyed that one. And last up on my list, my favorite book, I will say, was The Wager by David Grann. This is a nonfiction book about sailors in the 1700s sailing across the sea. They get shipwrecked. There's some mutiny and murder and cannibalism. Then there's this odd moment of people talking shit about people that are cannibals on this island. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm not into eating people, right? But like, everyone is dying and you're not gonna eat them to survive? That's weird. I don't know. You let me know. You gonna eat your friends? Or are you gonna not eat your friends? Okay, I'm getting so off topic here. Anyways, it's such an interesting story told through the perspectives of the actual people that were aboard the ship through their journals, and you get direct quotes from them and you get to see life through them. And it's honestly amazing that anybody ever made it out of sailing the ocean in the 1700s, because so much stuff went wrong. It was really interesting learning a lot of historical information through this, but I'm just a sucker for anything on the ocean. I do like historical fiction, and so yeah, picking up a book that was a straight nonfiction was a really interesting read for me this year, and I will definitely be reading, I think, a little bit more nonfiction going into this next year because I enjoyed this book so unbelievably much. So if you guys like nonfiction books, or you like history, or you like stories about the ocean, I don't know, I really recommend this one. I think probably most people that pick it up would be surprised by how amazing it was. So those are my rankings of books that were published in 2023. Let me know how you feel about these books, how you feel about other books that you read. Please let me know your favorite book that was published in 2023, because you guys always, you know, show me books that I wasn't aware of or that I haven't read yet. And yeah, hopefully this year I can read a little bit more books that are published in the new year. And yeah, we can do this whole video again at the end of next year. So let me know what you think about these. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye guys.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.